The argument that I'd rather run into a bear than into a man in the wilderness is an argument made in bad faith. I've spent a lot of time hiking. I work for the Forest Service, and the number of bears that have attacked me that I have seen is exactly zero. The number of men who have attacked me is also zero. The number of men I encounter on the trail is tens of thousands. The number of bears I encounter on the trail is maybe a dozen total in my entire life. So the real question here is not the number of times I've been attacked, but the ratio of attacks to encounters. In both of my experiences, their number is zero. People encounter strangers all the time. People do not encounter bears all the time. People who encounter bears do not usually get attacked. People who encounter men in the wilderness also do not usually get attacked. They're arguing in bad faith because someone found some number somewhere that said you're more likely to be harmed by a man in the wilderness than by a bear. But in reality, if you look at the stats, men are much more likely to be assaulted by other men than women to be assaulted by other men by a factor of almost 2 to 1. Part of this, I think, is because of where men and women go. And most women don't go into the wilderness where there are bears. And when they do, they usually don't go alone, which is the issue here. If you go alone into dangerous places, then it really doesn't matter what you encounter while you are there. If you go as a group, then all you have to do is outrun the slowest or the most out of shape person in order to not be the victim of whatever the predator might be. The simple fact of the matter with bears is also bears would really rather be left alone. I've spent some time in Alaska. I go to the Tetons often. I've been to Yellowstone often. And the number of times I have felt threatened by a bear is exactly zero. But the number of times I've felt threatened by hikers is also exactly zero. That's because people who go to these places are not typically going there in order to find someone to attack. Bears aren't wandering around in the Tetons looking for humans to attack. Bears are wandering around hoping to avoid humans because we're in their home. And they'd much rather, attack things they are actually going to eat than the preservative-laden toxic mess that a human has become in the modern society. So the notion that you would rather run into a bear in the wilderness than a man is silly. No one's been helped in the wilderness by a bear, but I know there are lots of people who have been aided and assisted and rescued in the wilderness by strange men. By a wild stretch of imagination, how many of you are familiar with many park rangers, forest rangers, or etc.? Because technically, every time you run into one of them, it's also a strange man. And yet, I have never heard any story about a forest ranger attacking a lone woman. I don't usually see lone women hikers. There have been a few. I'd say about 10 in the 8 years I've been doing this. And they typically go as a group. Well, that's your best bet in any case, no matter what you run into, even if you don't run into any animals at all. Because if you're exhausted or you're injured because you slip and fall, there are people who know where you are and people who can help you get home safely. So the notion is a reductio ad absurdum, that because some women somewhere have been assaulted by some men in dangerous places, probably while they were alone, but there aren't as many women who have been assaulted by bears in the wilderness, that it's somehow safer to spend time with a bear. But bears don't wander around on the subway. They're not in the mall. They're not on your block usually. And so the simple fact is there are fewer people attacked by bears because the bears are smart enough to stay away from us. And most of us don't go anywhere near where they live, but we are around humans all the time. So math predicts that most of the times you're going to be attacked will be by those around whom you spend time. In fact, most murders are committed by people who the victim knew, not by strangers. So this whole notion of strange men being dangerous and strange bears being safe is ablated by the fact that unless you are hanging around with bears the same amount you are hanging around with men, it is an inappropriate parallelism. Because if you spend time around as many bears as you do with humans, I guarantee you that you'd be attacked by a bear. Because that's the bare minimum. And I'm sticking to it. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the man versus bear thing. Some things that they seem to leave out of the equation. What other things need to be considered in that equation? I'll leave that to you to figure out. But it's a stupid TikTok trend, but then that's a redundancy.